Are you trying to breed your rabbits, but they're not being that cooperative, and you're wondering what exactly do you need to do to get them to actually breed like rabbits? Well, that's the topic of today's video, so stick around. Hey guys, welcome back to another Slightly Redneck video. Again, my name is Chris. If you're not familiar with this channel, I help you to produce your own meat, eggs, and vegetables from your backyard, your balcony, your deck, your garage, or heck, even a spare room in your house if that's the way you want to do it. Today's video, we're going to be talking about common problems when it comes to breeding rabbits. They're not always the most cooperative, and they don't always breed like rabbits like you always hear about. Let me start off by saying that you may notice my voice is a little bit strained. If you're familiar with this channel, I don't sound like I normally do. I've got a little bit of a cold. Don't feel all that bad, but it is putting a strain on my voice. But this was a very common question. I think I answered it 4 or 5 times on last week's live broadcast. So I thought that's probably a good indicator that people need a video on that. So I thought I'd go ahead and shoot it and get it out for you guys. All right, so, excuse me. Try to get through this here without coughing too much. But a couple problems you might run into when you're breeding your rabbits. First of all, if you don't know, you always take the female to the male. Don't ever take the male from his cage to the female's cage. Females can get very territorial and they can fight with the male. They can cause all kinds of problems. So if you're trying to do it that way, that may be your problem. Leave the male in his cage. Always take the female to the male's cage. Okay, with that being said, sometimes you take the female to the male's cage and the male is just ready to go. He really is excited. He gets on that female, but she will not lift for him. She squats down in a corner in the cage or something like that. We'll talk about a couple of tricks that you can use to get the female a little bit more receptive. First of all, you've got to realize that there is no specific season for breeding rabbits. They don't go into heat like some other animals do. They're induced ovulators, which means it's the act of breeding that actually makes the female drop the eggs. I'm having a hard time talking here, so bear with me. So what that means is that it's not that the female, she may not be ready to breed at that moment right there, but the male trying to breed is usually what puts them kind of in the mood to breed. It doesn't happen instantaneously just like that though. So what I do generally in that situation is I put the female in the male's cage. I give them about 10 or 15 minutes. If the female will not lift, remove her, put her back in her cage. And then that evening, you know, maybe I tried in the morning, that evening I'll come back and I'll try again. If she's still not receptive, give her 10, 15 minutes, put her back in her cage, try again the next morning, and then again the next evening, and then again the next morning. And just that act of continually introducing her to the buck will generally get her in the mood. So usually about the 4th or 5th time at the most that you've introduced her to the buck, she's going to be receptive. She's going to go ahead and lift and let him do his job, so to speak, and you'll get a successful fall off at that point. Not always the case though. Some other things that you may try if you're having problems. You may take the female, put her in the male's cage, take the male, put him in the female's cage for a little while. Leave him there for a couple of days and then switch him back. Give him a day and then move the female back to the male's cage. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. What that does is that gives the female the chance to kind of get around the cage, get familiar with the cage, smell the male a little bit, and that can put her in the breeding mood. Some other things that I've heard that have worked very well, I've never had to resort to this, but I have heard people taking the female, put her in a pet carrier, stick her in your car and drive her around the block a couple of times, bring her back and then put her in the male's cage and she's receptive. I have no idea why that would work, but I've heard many people talk about it and had success with that. So that's another trick that you might be able to try with that. Something else, if you're having continued problems with them not wanting to be receptive, you might try to add some light, just some artificial light into your cage and try to up the hours of daylight to about 14 hours a day. That tends to put them in a better mood for breeding. So it may make it a little bit easier for you. I have never had to add any external lights to my rabbit hutches and never had a problem with getting them to breed. Usually that reintroduction of the female to the male multiple times, morning, evening, morning, evening, morning, evening, that usually fixes the problem for me. But if you're having problems every time you try to breed, then maybe adding some extra light might be something that would work for you and help out. All right, now let's say that it's not the female that's the problem. The female is receptive, but the male is not wanting to do his job. He's not making the effort to mount the female. The biggest thing that causes that issue is the male being overweight, being overfed. So you might want to check and make sure he's not overweight. And I've talked before about how much to feed your rabbits, but just to run through that real quick again in this video, really only feed them as much as they'll eat within 24 hours. I feed my rabbits in the morning. I give them about a cup of food. It's 1 cup, literally. of food, and then I monitor that. They get unlimited hay, as much hay as they want to eat, but they only get 1 cup of pellets per day. Now I watch that. If I go back the next day and I open up their feeder in the morning to feed them and there's pellets left over, then they'll get a little bit less food that day, maybe 3/4 of a cup. If I go back to feed them and I open it up, all the pellets are gone, and as soon as I dump the food in there, that rabbit dives in and starts eating, well then they'll get a little bit more, maybe just, not even a 1/4 cup more, 1/8 of a cup more pellets that day, until I find the amount that they'll eat within 24 hours. And that's a good way to make sure that your buck does not get overweight. If a buck is overweight, often he's going to be lazy, he's not going to feel like performing, and that may be the problem. That's generally, in fact, 99% of the time, if your buck's not performing, that could be the case. There are times in the middle of summer when it's really hot out, over 80 degrees, that you could get, bucks can go sterile, but they're generally still going to want to breed at that point. So they'll go through the act of breeding, but it may not be, they may not be fertile. They may not sterilize the eggs. He may not get any babies, but that's not generally the cause of them not wanting to breed at all. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. All right, well, I know you guys said on the last live video that you wanted these videos to be a little bit longer, but I'm having a real hard time talking and getting through this. Hopefully I laid out some good pointers for you guys, gave you some tips that'll help fix those problems for you. Thank you so much for watching this video, and as always, God bless.